Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War, update extra video, giving you the, I don't know what this is giving you because it's, well, it is, okay. This is an update extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into, to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine, as I always say, because I think this is important. It does give us some extra contextual understanding. But it's only one very narrow political area that I just want to do a very short, hopefully short video on. But first of all, I want to just correct an earlier video that has now been cut, so you can't see it, but some of you did see it, where I included a video of Stuart Varney from Fox interviewing Trump, and Trump came up with what seemed to be very pro-Ukraine rhetoric, and I was like, he's done a 180 shift. And as many of you pointed out, the Dow Jones on here was outdated, and he's talking about MiGs. Well, I recognise this, and so MiGs were what were given to Ukraine from Poland and Slovakia like ages ago. So actually, this is an old video, and this is not Trump's current position. But what's interesting there is that at one point he did have a good position on Ukraine partially from this video, and he's since switched. So where I said he's done a 180 switch and now he's got a good position, the reality is he's done a 180 switch from what was at one point a good position and has now adopted a really kind of, I would say, anti-Ukraine position. He's had to compromise recently because his own party is split, and so he sided with the politically sensible position of supporting Mike Johnson by putting to the floor that vote in Congress recently, and kind of went against Marjorie Taylor Greene, although he subsequently came out and was quite nice about Marjorie Taylor Greene. So he's trying to keep everyone sweet here. But his position on Ukraine is broadly, well, my opinion is he doesn't really know much about international politics at all, and he just says these I think he has these bigger ideas like Europe aren't paying enough for NATO type thing, and I think he even simplifies that idea as if we're paying for NATO. The idea that Europe isn't paying enough for their defences as a percentage of GDP, and the US are, and we're not going to help Ukraine until they do that. But of course, Europe has paid more towards Ukraine than the US has, and Europe, on average, are paying more than 2% of their GDP on defence across Europe, and some nations are paying more than the US, like Poland, for example, as a percentage of GDP. So I think he's got a confused understanding of what's going on, and I don't think he really understands Ukraine that well. In fact, there have been analysts out there have been people in his administration that have said that he doesn't understand. He just doesn't have a great enough understanding of geopolitics. Anyway, I don't want to get into that, but I want to pick on one particular element of this interview. There was a fascinating interview. It's a really interesting insight into Trump's head. So everything is about him. So I've done this. I'm greater than the world has ever seen. All those usual, they've almost become rhetorical fillers that he uses. It's more than you've ever seen before. There's been no one else that's done more than this, or greater than anyone's ever could have imagined, or more than anyone could have expected. That kind of thing he says in every single statement he ever says these days. There's an element of that. There's some iteration of that. But here in this interview, he is trying to be strong in support for Ukraine, or at least in strong in his being against Russia, which is a step away from, say, the Helsinki press conference that he gave all those years back, where he was cozying up to Putin. And I think, personally, I think he's not too enamored with Ukraine because Zelensky refused to give him compromise on Biden when Trump said, we're going to not give you Javelins, until you give us that compromise. Zelensky said, no, that ain't going to happen. And then eventually Trump was put under so much pressure that he gave those Javelins and military aid to Ukraine. But then what happened was Trump then went around and he still says, I was the one that gave Javelins. Look at me. I'm really amazing. I gave these Javelins. And I said in that part of the video that I've now cut out from my geopolitical video earlier, that Trump wouldn't have been responsible for giving those javelins. It's not like Trump gets into power and says, oh, do you know what I really wanted to do? I really wanted to give javelins to Ukraine. So let's go and do that. Let's do that, everyone. It's me that gave javelins to Ukraine. I should be held responsible for this. It was my idea type thing. And my point earlier was it wouldn't have been his idea. It would have been the Pentagon and the Department of Defense, which he would have signed off. It would have gone through Congress and he would have signed off. Anyway, I was emailed by someone today who, I just find it interesting when people email me, expect to change my mind by insulting me. So this is someone who's pro-Ukraine. I'm not going to read it out because it's a private email. Well, I'm going to read a little bit about it. I won't say who it's from, but it's just like, how you have conversations with people is not say, you are ignorant and stop your predictable lies. Can I just say, as a point of advice for anyone that ever communicates with me, if you accuse me of being a liar, that will trigger me to get pretty freaking angry. So I responded to this email fairly angrily, even though it's a pro-Ukrainian. Like, if you're going to accuse me of lying, that is the one thing I don't do. Right, my dad never lied, and I get it off my dad, I think. But to think that I sit here all the time that I do, generating all the opinions I do, and I have a set of opinions in my head, but I tell you something that I know is false, and I have the truth here, but I tell you some kind of falsehood. That is a lie. I do not lie. I might tell you things that are incorrect. I might have the wrong opinion according to you, or I might have the wrong what I think are facts. Yeah, but I will not lie to you. Like, the whole point of this is that I am trying to be as accurate as possible. And I may change my views in light of new evidence. I might have made the incorrect calculations, but I will not lie to you because I don't lie to myself. Like, you get found out in philosophy if you are peddling lies. Like, I spent the last 15 years writing books. I've got a dozen books on my philosophical outlooks on life and everything, and I've written 5,000 articles, right? And I've done how many thousands of videos for you guys. Like, this is all about me putting my ideas out there so that they can be refined and improved, because I can't go to bed at night thinking that I've got the wrong idea about something. Like, no one really does that. Oh, look, I believe complete falsehoods. Well, that's cool. Oh, the moon is made of cheese. Yep, awesome. It's because I want to believe that. So no, that's not how we think. So again, most of us think we're right all the time, and those who lie do that for some kind of gain, I guess. But that's not me. That's not how I operate. Like, I can't sleep at night if I think part of my worldview doesn't work, right? So I have to alter my worldview so that it works, so that it's not incorrect, so that it's not brittle, so that it's not like, it is no surprise that one of my more recent books is, the front cover is a brick wall, and it's my entire worldview built up from bottom upwards, because everything needs to make sense, and it can't be built on this faulty foundation that will crumble with the slightest shove. It needs to be solid, because I need to know that I'm believing the most rational, justified position possible. Now, when it comes to politics, there's an awful lot of kind of subjective ideas about how I think the world should be that will integrate some kind of preferences about what kind of world I want that will be very different from another person, and therefore we might have. It's not like completely factual because there's subjective preference in there, and politics is an element of that. But politics is a subset of morality, right? And so I have very strong opinions of how the world should be and how we should go about arriving at that end outcome that I have in mind. But my brick wall does not include in it lying to people. So if you're going to email me and saying, by the way, you're wrong, stop your predictable lies, you owe your audience and President Trump a personal apology for carrying the buckets of political hatred and denial of Trump's accomplishments. And then he says, I still love your work and Slava Ukraine. I am not lying. And I don't owe Trump an apology, and here's why. So here are the claim, and here's the claim, and I'm going to go back through this, and I'm going to establish why I was correct and why actually I think I'm owed an apology. And this sounds a bit personal, but like, don't email me and tell me I'm a liar, and then email me and tell me I'm ignorant about this and that. We'll come on to the ignorant bit later. So this is what Trump said.
And they're doing an amazing job. But, I was the one that sent in the Javelins. I mean, everyone refuses to acknowledge that, and I took a lot of heat. And I sent it in very openly and glowingly, and they said Obama sent blankets and Trump sent Javelins. Well, nobody knew how well those Javelins would do and how well but those Javelins that knocked out all the tanks, those were sent by me, and we sent them in large numbers too. But they need other kinds of help.
So the idea is that he sent the Javelin. This is what he's saying. Trump is saying, I'm amazing. I should take the plaudits. I should take the congratulations for sending those Javelins. It's all about me. And as I was said in my earlier video, as I've already said in this video, he wouldn't have known what a Javelin was before that tenure as president. So the idea that this was his idea, I'll tell you what, we really need to send Javelins. It just wouldn't have happened. So anyway, your man here says, your ignorance on foreign military sales, FMS, which I talked about recently, and foreign military funding is done by the State Department through the embassy and its military attaches. This is done at the direction of the US president and his administration's defense and security directives. You likely do not know this, but the international trade and foreign agreements are one of the few direct powers a president has. In other words, what he's trying to say is he ordered this, and it was his thing, and he's therefore responsible. Now, let's look at this, because actually this is a really important subject. The idea that I say this important subject, it is a subject that pops up an awful lot, and it's a really big talking point from Trump himself and lots of people who love him. The first thing I'm going to do is look into kind of what went on, what was the context here. Here's what you need to know about the US aid package to Ukraine that Trump delayed. This is from Defense News, right? So this is coming from a military article. Okay, at the center of the latest scandal threatening to take down President Trump. So this is going back in time to 2019 when it was all kicking off. Donald Trump is the $391 million military aid that the US leader reportedly asked his staff to freeze for 2 months before dropping the hold a week ago under pressure from lawmakers. So it came out eventually because Congress forced him to do this. But he was, as it says, reportedly delaying it. And it was that phone call with Zelensky that this was all concerning. Anyway, on Wednesday, Washington was consumed with a July 25th call between Trump and Ukraine's new president, Zelensky. According to a memorandum of the call released by the White House, Zelensky asked to buy American-made Javelin anti-tank weapons, and Trump asked Zelensky to help him work with US officials to investigate political rivals. So here's an interesting point, early doors here, is that Zelensky asked Trump for Javelins. Actually, the reality is Poroshenko, the previous president, had asked for Javelins to be provided to Ukraine. So actually, this wasn't a new president coming in and saying, we are going to do this. This is actually a new president responding to a request, or more likely, the Department of Defense and the Pentagon responding to a request from a country for a certain type of weapon. And then the yes or no part of that coming from Trump, or indeed coming from the DOD, the Pentagon, Congress, and then Trump signs it off. That call fueled a whistleblower's complaint that has become central to the formal impeachment inquiry launched Tuesday by Nancy Pelosi. But the call also highlights the vital role of US military aid to Ukraine, which has lost 13,000 of its people since its conflict with Russia began in 2014. Obviously, this is before the 2022 iteration. So back in June of that year, the Pentagon announced plans to provide $250 million to Ukraine in security cooperation funds for additional training, equipment, and advisory efforts to build the capacity of Ukraine's armed forces. The US State Department separately planned to provide $141 million in aid. So you've got the State Department and you've got the Pentagon both seeking to support Ukraine. And this is an extension of what had been going on since 2014. Right, so through the Obama administration, although they were reticent to provide lethal weaponry, they didn't want to escalate. Trump denigrates them with pillows and whatnot, but actually he downplays what they have done. And I think it's this article that talks about that being a downplaying of what the Obama administration had done. But there was a step change, but that wouldn't have come from Trump. That would have come from the Department of Defense or the Pentagon and the State Department and administration aides. And we know this later because I'll pop into a foreign policy article that will give quite a bit of enlightenment to that. But anyway, the US has committed more than $1.5 billion in security assistance since 2014. So again, this is all part of what has been happening. Now, the difference is the lethal aid part. But anyway, we go on a little bit further, and they'll find some more. So lethal aid and Donald Trump. So one irony is that Trump administration was going further with its aid than the Obama administration by deciding to provide Ukraine with lethal weapons. In 2017, Trump announced his intent to provide the Javelin, and Congress approved an assistance package of 210 missiles and 37 launchers, together with $47 million. Quote, when Trump was elected, the first thing they did was send in the Javelin. It wasn't exactly high end, but we were very happy. And they built on a very firm foundation, said Jim Townsend, who spent 8 years as US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO policy and is now the Center for New American Security think tank. Quote, playing games with them now is nuts because we want to keep this trajectory upward. And it talks about Javelin and about how good it is and whatnot. So we go back to the evolution of this military aid. So American lawmakers from the Democratic and Republican parties, at least as far back as 2015, have been urging the United States to help Ukraine with arms and other heavy military equipment to defend itself against Russian-backed separatists. So this is really important. So it's a bipartisan. So both Democrats and Republican lawmakers have been wanting this to happen since 2015. Now, the Obama administration didn't allow it to happen, but it's not a thing that came from Trump. This is something that existed in Congress and was being stopped by the Obama administration and then was allowed by the new Trump administration. But the question is, was it Trump or the administration? Especially when you're considering people like, Bolton, who was very hawkish. You had some seriously hawkish people in there. So, okay. Though aid from the US, Poland and NATO allies spiked after the invasion, 2014 one, the Obama administration worried in part that providing Ukraine with lethal aid would provoke Moscow into escalating an already volatile situation. The training and institutional reform efforts aimed to continue stamping out corruption and helping Ukraine become interoperable with NATO. Ukraine is not a member of NATO. Quote, Javelins were considered a step up, and the concern was that the Russians were going to step up on their end, Townsend said. It wasn't that there was a lot of tree hugging in the Obama administration. It was to go up a notch if they go up a notch. So it's this kind of like, it's not about, it's basically anti-escalation, isn't it? Some of the early non-lethal aid was useful after Ukraine received 20 Lockheed Martin AN/TPQ-53 radar systems that track incoming mortar and short-range artillery fire in 2015. The casualty rate for units equipped with those systems went from 47% to about 18%, another expert said. Now, this then goes back to what Trump said, which is Obama just provided sleeping bags and pillows. And it's absolutely not true. You got, 20 AN/TPQ-53 radar systems that are, that was some of the most useful equipment, is a quote here, that we ever provided them because it provided them early warning, Hodges said. I wonder if that's Ben Hodges. The Ukrainians used the radar so much that they were under so much rocket and mortar fire that they became extremely proficient, so we learned from them. Congress has since expanded the categories of available military aid. Its authorization for the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative for 2016 included anti-armor weapon systems, mortars, crew-served weapons and ammunition, grenade launchers and ammunition, and small arms and ammunition, but also unspecified cyber and electronic warfare capabilities. In response to tension in the Azov Sea in 2017, so this is now fully into Trump's administration, Congress added the categories of air defense and coastal defense radars, naval mine and countermine capabilities, and littoral zone, that's like where you land on a coastline, and coastal defense vessels. That tension peaked in November 2018 when the Russian Coast Guard fired on captured 3 Ukrainian Navy vessels, along with 24 crew members sailing through the contested Kerch Strait. So on and so forth about how it, building up with border guard staff and boats. But to be clear, Ukraine has a robust military and defense industrial base on its own, and according to Sikorsky, Kiev is likely looking less for small arms than for larger, more sophisticated training, as well as maritime capabilities, intelligence, and cyber support. So it's about full spectrum support, of which the Americans were building up and building up. But it did evolve, and it did evolve through Trump's administration to bigger and more lethal weaponry. But it wasn't Trump sort of bundling in and giving lethal aid. And then we had this situation where, okay, we'll go to the decision to give Javelins. And this is a foreign policy article or report. Trump resisted sale of Javelins to Ukraine. So this is the key part to the argument. So you've seen the evolution. And then it's like, okay, well, was it Trump that came in and said, let's give Javelins? I really want Javelins. I've always thought Javelins are cool. I'm a big Javelin fan. So Republicans are defending him in the impeachment inquiry by saying he gave more military aid than his predecessor, but it came only after the reluctant president was convinced it would be good for US business. So this wasn't a trying to help Ukraine thing. This was a trying to help US thing, and he had to be convinced. It wasn't from him, it was from those people around him, which was exactly the point I made in the video that I eventually cut out because it was an anachronistic video. But in response to you man who's calling me a liar, I responded with all of this as substance, and he didn't respond at all to any of that substance, and then said, do I need to list the list of logical fallacies? And then he said, weak source at its best, I could go on, and he's provided no arguments. I could go on. Well, please actually start. But you've obviously seen your own biases at work here. Take a step back and look at your responses without your self-imposed political lobotomy. It's like, seriously? Liberals are the reason thousands of Ukrainians died to appease their political vendetta. Not often 8 of the most extreme Republicans get supported by all Democrats. Political games at the expense of Ukrainian lives. Until this happened, I thought you really cared about Ukraine. Like, that's not the way to convince someone to your point of view. I am convinced by rational evidence, and that is what I am presenting here. So, as US President Donald Trump's congressional allies seek to defend him from a rapidly escalating impeachment inquiry, so this is going to 2019, they've repeatedly pointed out the fact that it was Trump, not his predecessor, President Barack Obama, who signed off on providing Ukraine with lethal weapons such as Javelin anti-tank missiles, which is true. He did sign off on that. But current and former officials who were privy to the decision in December 2017 to provide the missiles to Ukraine told Foreign Policy that Trump had been reluctant to go ahead with the move, and only did so when aides persuaded him that it could be good for US business. Quote, he wanted to know if the Ukrainians would pay us back, said a former senior officer with direct knowledge of the decision to provide Ukraine with a grant to buy the powerful anti-tank Javelin missiles. It's not clear what Trump's views were on other aspects of US military aid to Ukraine. So this fits with what we know now, that Trump wants a loan process to give aid to Ukraine rather than just give it outright. He wants wants something back for that. Anyway, Trump is accused by Democrats of withholding military aid to Ukraine in an effort to further his political interests. But his Republican allies have pointed out that this aid was held up for only 55 days, and Trump delivered more to the Ukrainians than Obama had. During the second day of public impeachment hearings on Friday, congressional Republicans sat in front of a large black and white sign that read, President Trump gave Ukraine missiles. Quote, the strong support came with this administration, not the Obama administration, said Republican Representative Brad Wenstrup during the first public hearing on Wednesday. Giving Ukraine lethal weapons had been a red line for Obama, who feared that it could cause Russia to escalate conflict. But details of Trump's reluctance to go ahead with the move appear to undercut none of the key tenets of his defense in the impeachment process, and they reveal how his transactional approach to Ukraine extends well beyond the current allegations that he sought to leverage a US military aid for political gain. Trump's skepticism towards the decision was also detailed in closed-door testimony given before House impeachment investigators by Catherine Croft, who served as Ukraine director at the National Security Council while deliberations about the Javelins were ongoing. In a transcript released this week, Croft testified that in response, so this is not an anonymous person, this is transcript testifying from someone who is in a position of knowledge. she testified that in response to a request for javelins made by then Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko. So this goes back to the idea that, Zelensky asked for them, but Poroshenko previously asked for them. This wasn't Trump coming in saying, let's give them javelins. It's here we've got a request for javelins that's gone through the Pentagon, gone through the State Department, whatever, and they've said, yeah, this is probably a good idea. We should give them javelins. What do you think, Trump? Trump said that Ukraine should pay for the weapons itself, because that's what Trump is like, transactional. The US president said that Ukraine was capable of being a wealthy company if it wasn't for corruption. Okay. Current and former officials told Foreign Policy that only when aides persuaded Trump of the business case to give Ukraine the javelins did he sign off on the decision. So listen to him go, it was me, I did it, I'm amazing, if it wasn't for me, blah, blah, blah. But actually, he had to be persuaded. So the amazingness comes from, I would argue, State Department, Pentagon, and the aides around him who convinced him it was a good idea. They successfully argued that if the United States provided the missiles first as aid paid for by a US grant, then the Ukrainians would come back later to buy more out of their own pockets. The officials said they were directed by the White House to keep news of the decision low-key until the weapons were delivered to Ukraine in the spring of 2018. And then it goes on to talk about, the delay and the interference in the aid package. And yeah, it's interesting here that, you got the phone call between Zelensky and Trump. It goes on, while Trump's relationship with the Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin has raised eyebrows, his decision to approve lethal aid to Ukraine has often been held up as evidence that the Trump administration has been, if anything, more hawkish when it came to Russia than its predecessor. However, the problem is, the administration might be, the DOD might be, the State Department might be, they know what's going on, right? Trump, and this is not criticism of Trump, because I keep saying this about Biden. This is why I think Biden doesn't make the decisions about whether ATACMS go. It's exactly this. I'm consistent here. I think it's people like Jake Sullivan and people in the Department of Defense saying, oh, not too cool on the ATACMS. If everyone had been cool on ATACMS, Biden, I'm absolutely positive, would have been more like, literally everyone is up for this. You're all more expert than me on what weapons work and how they work and whether Ukraine should get them. That's cool, I'll sign that off. But I think there's this idea of anti-escalation within an element of the Biden administration. Whether that stretches to the State Department and Pentagon, I think is an interesting conversation. But I'm not so simplistic to think that one person is responsible for all these nuanced decisions. You have a kind of policy agenda where it might be like, let's help Ukraine. How can we help Ukraine? That's where a president comes in and says, this is the kind of culture I want around here. This is a policy direction I want, which is we need to be against Russia and helping Ukraine. Trump comes in and says, I'm transactional. What do we get out of it? What do I get out of it? Personally, right, if we're going to give something to Ukraine, I want some compromise on Biden because I want some benefit out of whatever we're doing. That's what Trump is like, right? And that is, in my opinion, absolutely terrible. Trump is also very positive towards Putin. Again, go to the Helsinki press conference where he puts Putin's word above his own intelligence services and the empirical evidence his intelligence services have provided for him. But I've spoken to Putin and he says it's all fine. And by the way, he said, and I think this is a really good idea. This is what Putin said, if you remember. I think it's a really good idea. But Vladimir Putin has said that he will supply investigators that will come over to our country and help us interrogate people and find out. It's like, what are you doing? So this is a context in which we should understand Trump. Croft testified to lawmakers that she had been tasked by the then National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster to assist in writing a paper to make the case to the president to approve arms sales to Ukraine. So she was the one, Catherine Croft was the one, or one of the ones, that's responsible for persuading Trump. The move was also supported by then Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and then Secretary of Defense James Mattis. So these are the people that made those decisions on the arms, not frickin' Trump. And so to have someone try and lecture me by email, by insulting me, calling me a liar, calling me ignorant, but then saying you don't know how the foreign military sales works and the president gets to make these decisions on his own. Like, yeah, fair enough. Have you read anything about this? Do you know anything about that which you are talking? Sure, I could be wrong. Give me some receipts. Don't just give me assertions. Other than the president, the only source of objection to the decision came from the White House's Office of Management and Budget, led by Mick Mulvaney. I remember him. Croft told lawmakers that Mulvaney had held up the decision by about 2 weeks out of concern as to how Russia would react. The Ukraine specialist testified that it was unusual for the Offices of Management and Budget to raise issues about foreign policy that weren't purely grounded in budgetary concerns. Michael Carpenter, who served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Eurasia under Obama, said it was unprecedented for the Office of Management and Budget to question foreign policy making, especially when the State Department, Department of Defense and National Security Council were on the same page about an issue. So this is to say, this is the guy, Michael Carpenter, saying we have the State Department, the Department of Defense and National Security Council all wanting more aid, lethal aid to go. It's not Trump. Trump's not mentioned in that calculation. It's unheard of and it smacks of political influence, Carter, who is now the senior director of the Penn Biden Center, said. Daniel Freed, who served as Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs under George Bush, said it was unusual but not unheard of for the budgetary office to raise foreign policy issues. It's wrong, it's not necessarily corrupt, said Freed, who added that Mulvaney's concerns about Russia's reaction echoed arguments put forward under the Obama administration. So this is like a continuation of the anti-escalation movement, so on and so forth. I don't think any more of that. You get the point. I mean, my point here is exactly the point that I made earlier. Just to reiterate, just to conclude that, and I have evidence for this, rational justification for this, that Trump was not the one who was responsible for, other than he eventually was persuaded and signed it off, that's where he gets a responsibility. But to somehow take that as being his personal thing and to take plaudits for that and to be morally responsible for that, such that he would say this kind of nonsense is not correct. And then for big Trump fans who love Trump loads and don't like me insulting Trump, to then jump on that is to me just a typical talking point that we've heard now since 2019, and that talking point needs to be debunked, which is what I'm trying to do here. You know, you get the point. We can go through the whole impeachment stuff, but he did hold it up. There is all this evidence for this. Plenty of decent articles you can look into concerning this. He did want compromise on Biden because he is transactional. If I'm going to do something for you, you've got to do something for me. Quid pro quo. That's how he operates. There are heaps of papers. I've read journals on Trump's transactional foreign policy nature. You go and read Madeleine Albright's excellent book, Fascism, where she has a whole chapter on Trump and talks about his transactional nature in foreign policy, but that's not how foreign policy always works. It's about alliances and it's about doing things together with people for mutual benefit. But if you see everything as zero-sum game, it means that you can't work with anyone cooperatively. Everyone is your competitor, and therefore, if we give you something, we need something in return that's tangible, rather than understanding security architecture and building up relationships and security across nations where people work in a cooperative manner, so on and so forth. Anyway, that's my rather longer rant than I was expecting over. Just again, I reiterate, by all means, change my opinion, but calling me ignorant, a liar, and all those other invectives is probably not going to cut the mustard. I replied to them. I'm quite forceful in the reply, but because that's what I do. That's what I've been doing for 15 years. These kind of arguments, I freaking love, right? I might sound angry and put upon or whatever. I'm not. I freaking love those arguments. When I'm writing back, I might tapping the keyboard hard, yes, because this is like, yeah, I'm in my element. You give me an argument. I'm going to give you substance. Let's see who comes out top. In this, in a sense, it's a bit like a game, but it's an important game, and a game that it's really important that I get right for me, because I need to make sure that if I'm telling you the amount of stuff that I'm telling you on a daily basis, that is as justified and as correct as possible. And if I'm wrong on Trump in this case, in this particularly narrow case, talking about javelins, then please let me know. Come at me with receipts. Anyway, thanks for watching. I hope I haven't turned off too many people who love Trump, but I'm not a big fan of him, and I find it really difficult when people give him a lot of love, because I just don't think he's a nice human being, and that does a lot for me in terms of my valuations of people. Anyway, Toolpit, speak soon.